This is an abridged version of the paper, an integrated agro-ecosystem and livelihood systems approach for the poor and vulnerable in dry areas, published in Food Security in 2013 by Van-Ginkel and other authors. In the face of complexity, many research efforts address a component of the problem rather than attempting to deal with all its dimensions. Interventions based on such sectoral work tend to rely on narrow perspectives, unrealistic extrapolations, untested assumptions, and misplaced narratives, and have often failed to provide lasting benefits to rural households. Much agricultural research, in particular, has tended to focus on addressing specific production constraints without taking into account the constellation of social, economic, and institutional factors that influence adoption. Research on underlying causes of unsustainable land management in dry lands has included broad diagnostic assessments, studies of property rights and collective action in both sedentary and pastoral systems, encroachment by external interests, population pressure and poverty, drought as a driver and trigger of desertification, access to markets and infrastructure, economic returns to conservation practices, extension approaches, factor market imperfection, social capital, and irreversibility thresholds. Despite the excellence of much of this research, its disciplinary focus has often resulted in promotion of interventions that have not been widely adopted. This paper argues that an integrated approach to improving livelihoods and the agro-ecosystems upon which they depend can overcome many of these shortcomings and deliver interventions that are widely appropriate, applicable and adoptable across the world's drylands. The innovations in approach proposed here are to combine vertical and horizontal integration and to acknowledge and address fine-scale variation in the contextual factors that govern adoption of interventions. In the present context, vertical integration implies a nested scale approach, field, farm, landscape, region, where large-scale domains are identified, across which contextual variation in drivers of adoption are understood, mapped, and addressed by facilitating local adoption. Horizontal integration relates to working across disciplines and sectors: agriculture, forestry, markets, environment, water, and energy. The enabling policy and institutional requirements for innovation are addressed across scales. The agroecosystems in dry areas comprise a diverse and complex mix of pastoral, agropastoral, rain-fed, and irrigated farming practices. Farmers and pastoralists employ a diverse mix of food, fodder and fiber crops, vegetables, rangeland and pasture species, fruit and fuelwood trees, medicinal plants, livestock and fish to meet their food and livelihood needs. Pastoralists and farmers have developed these practices over centuries, adapting them to the limited resources and variable climate that characterize dry areas. Agricultural production systems in the drylands face not only persistent water scarcity and frequent drought, but also high climatic variability, land degradation, desertification, and widespread poverty. These constraints are expected to intensify as a result of climate change. The dry areas are home to several important centers of origin and diversity of crops, vegetables, livestock, trees, and fish, and most traditional farming systems maintain agrobiodiversity in the form of cropland races, local animal breeds, pastoral flora, and other native and wild species. These genetic resources can provide breeders with the traits needed to adapt plants and animals to heterogeneous and changing environments, and are an important buffer against the effects of climate change and desertification. However, land degradation and pressure on natural habitats threaten biodiversity in dry areas, and farmer behavior, if not directed otherwise, will generally result in the decline in species diversity to meet immediate production objectives. Drylands are also generally economically and politically marginalized because they are perceived to have low production potential and are generally sparsely populated. Many smallholders in dry areas have poor access to markets for their products and to inputs such as improved seeds, fertilizers, and information about production technologies. There are often gender differences in access to inputs, rural services, information, and technology that disadvantage women. Dryland systems are heterogeneous, which means that development challenges and trajectories to address this vary at fine scale. We view the spectrum of development challenges facing livelihood systems as a gradient. At one end are livelihood systems with a low asset base, where the key challenge is to mitigate vulnerability or risk and increase resilience. At the other end are livelihood systems with an asset base sufficient to take advantage of opportunities for intensifying production in response to market opportunities. The challenges for these intensifiable livelihood systems relate to environmental sustainability, equity, and economic growth as well as agricultural productivity. Food security, poverty reduction, and natural resource management are important everywhere along the spectrum. They might be addressed in different sequences depending not only on the starting point, but also on the surrounding institutional, political, and environmental circumstances. Numerous interventions are available or are being developed that can be leveraged and combined, but these alone will be unlikely to achieve significant impacts on poverty, food security, and the environment at scale. Integration and capacity and strengthening mechanisms are also needed for local successes to be scaled up and out. These need to be targeted to regional and local stakeholders, including socially and disadvantaged groups, as well as those who influence policy, delivery of technologies, access to markets, equity, and economic balances. This underscores the importance of a horizontally and vertically integrated approach, which we propose as a new core value for research on dryland agriculture.